And it's my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker of the conference this morning. We already saw a quick cameo of him. It's the CEO of Phrase, Georg Ell. And I'm going to keep it very, very short because we're already a little bit behind schedule. And I know that Georg is chomping at the bit to get started. So go ahead, Georg, and get started right away.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to keep going unless someone tells me otherwise, and that you can see some slides. One of the joys of having, over the last few months, put a huge effort in turning Phrase into a very AI native business. And I'd be very happy to talk about that. We're doing with some incredible, crazy things, hundreds of agents running around the business, writing production code, reviewing PRs, and doing many things around the go-to-market side of things as well. But anyway, one of the wonderful things about that is that I now write most of my slides by asking Claude to review the context of recent conversations, recent meetings, and so on. So I don't write any more of my own slides. It's like the engineers don't write prompts, they write loops. And as a CEO, I used to write all my own slides. Now I don't. And the nice thing about that is it's anchored to ground truth. So everything you see here was produced just from a few prompts asking to go out and kind of anchoring ground truth across our business. So I'm going to try and take us through 3 areas, and then would love to take some questions as well. I can see the chat just on one side. I'm just going to open the Q&A window here as well. So if people want to drop any questions in chat or Q&A, if I can't address them as I go along, I'll try and address them at the end. And what I'm hoping to do is to share some perspectives that are interesting, grounded in practical reality, but also hopefully a little bit thought-provoking and maybe spicy. I don't know, try and make it a bit more interesting. So I hope the questions will come back in the same way. And one of the reasons I do things like this is actually to interact. And actually, I think I'm at my best not when I'm monologuing, but when I'm interacting with people. So I would love to take questions. And look, if they're beyond my capability to answer them, I'll just say so. But otherwise, I'll do my best. So, 3 areas that I want to talk about. Commodity trap, the model isn't with the moat or where the value really is. And then the potential to upgrade the role of localization inside our businesses. So commodity trap, there's research there now that tells us something I think a lot of us know, but aren't always comfortable to acknowledge, which is that the cost of translation is dropping through the floor and will effectively become entirely commoditized. The value that we provide as an industry is not in translation and localization. And actually, the provocative statement I made to start with, and I said this at conferences over the last few weeks, is I think we actually need to stop defining ourselves and stop using the language of translation and localization. I think when we go into a room and we talk about translation and localization, we lose the room because people see this as a solved problem. They have a great translation experience on their iPhone, and they think it scales from the iPhone. An engineer built something in a weekend. It looks okay. As one of my customers said to me, the engineers will come in and say, it looks like Spanish. And of course, if like me, you don't speak Spanish, okay, well, it looks like Spanish. So the problem is that decision makers inside businesses are not as expert and never will be, and don't care to be as we are in our field, right? And so it's very important that we have to have the humility, I think, as an industry to acknowledge that we can lose the room very quickly when we talk about translation and localization. And I'll extend that even more provocatively in a moment. So look, I think we have spent a long time as an industry optimizing for what was the right thing at the time, but may just be the wrong thing now, right? Which is volume and cost per word. This may have been right at the time, but I don't think it's the right thing to focus on today because it's not really where the value is. The value isn't in just like reducing the cost. If we as an industry are so focused on reducing the cost per word of everything that we provide, then we're commoditizing ourselves and turning ourselves into a cost item. And you know what business leaders do to cost line items? They try and reduce them to zero as much as possible. And so I think that really misses the value that we bring. We know we bring it, right? As an industry, we have an opportunity to be, more confident, I think, more bold, to talk about the transformation that we can apply to content. So when I'm asked what we do, I say, ours is a company, one of the leading companies in the world of what we do. And what we do is we help global brands, very recognizable brands, to transform their content for a global audience. Because how you sell a hotel room to a business traveler is different to how you sell a hotel room to an elderly couple in one language, let alone when you apply 50 different language and cultural contexts on top. And so we can provide, and we as the industry, we can provide value in one language and then compound that value across cultures, demographic intersections of age, race, gender, religious affiliation, cultural affiliation, interests, previous purchase history, and so on and so on. So I think there's a window open now to reposition what we do. And the value is in the context. And like, everyone is slowly learning this, because for the last 6 months intensely, but even for the previous 2 years before that, slightly less intensely, it's been a huge focus on the models. And like, the model is where the value is going to be, and the models can solve these problems. And what we all know, we being people who have played extensively with these models until 2 o'clock in the morning and pick them up off the floor when they break and then fix them again and again and again, we know the models are not the solution. It's the context around the model. It's the harness around the model. So that is something that we have to focus on. It's not about volume and cost per word. It's about intelligence and context. So this is where I said I was going to expand the spicy or provocative statement. I think when we go into a room as translation and localization people, and we talk about quality, we lose the room again. And this is tough to sort of internalize, I think. And I said this at Lockworld, and people, half the room was nodding and half the room looked a bit sort of shocked. And it was interesting, right? And this is a bit more nuanced, right? Quality and quality metrics have a place, but I just think we need to reframe how we talk about this. Because when we go in and we talk about quality, it's like an engineer going to the CEO and talking about beautiful code. The CEO doesn't care. They just want you to ship. They don't care how beautiful the code is. They just want the business outcomes. So what I'd like to suggest is that as an industry, we need to think more about winning the game we're in by the rules of the game that we're playing. So if the game is selling stuff, is our content selling stuff? If the game is educating a population because we're a government agency, is the population engaging with our content and do they understand it? If the aim of the game is to warn people because we're a 0-day vulnerability announcement from a major antivirus company, then are we warning people? Do they get it? And it's got nothing to do with blur and comet and tur and edit distance and all the other sort of quality stuff, which is frankly academic. It's not practical. The business doesn't care about that stuff. So this might be a bit more nuanced. It's not that like you can put out content that is poor, but it's just define poor by the outcome that the content was intended to achieve. And we'll talk about intention in a little bit as well. So the model isn't the moat. And I think this is really, really important. The model companies would have you believe that, of course, it is the moat, but even they, right? We see today, Claude just introduced this new capability to use it in Slack. Why? Because Slack is the company context layer. So in a sense now, this is becoming very clear. Context is king. There was a phenomenal study, very interesting, written in March, this is relatively recent, which academically proved that the harness that you put around a model can improve the output of the model by up to 6 times, which is amazing, right? You can take the best model in the world and then get a 6 times better output if you put the right context around it, the right memory, the right guardrails, the right definitions of done. And of course, this is also why and where and how companies and brands differentiate from one another. If you have Nike, Adidas, Puma, and Reebok all using the same model and all sounding the same, it's a disaster. So how do they sound different? Well, they build a different harness around it, have a different context. So this is also a very valuable insight, because what it means is that as the models themselves improve, as you improve the quality of the fuel you put into the machine, then the whole machine will perform better and better. So the models don't kind of swallow up and overcome the whole infrastructure you put around it. The infrastructure itself benefits from the underlying model, but continues to evolve and produce value on top of those models. So what do we mean by harness? A few things. We talk about capturing the intention. What is the outcome that the content is intended to achieve? And again, with the same source content or even source-less content, you can have very different intentions, and you can drive very different transformations according to the audience that it's being directed at, right? The personalization concept. A company can have glossaries and style guides and translation memories and all of these things, but it can also start to stack these on top of one another. So you could have a company level style guide and then a regional one and a brand specific one under that, and then a product one under that. You stack all of these things. And then you can start to think about the weighting between the layers. And we have a name for that, which I'll come to. Quality, as I said, it's not binary pass fail. It's much more nuanced. It's scored. It's adaptive, which is really important, which goes to the final point around adaptation and closing the loop. So like measuring the outcomes, well, firstly, inputting the desired outcomes, then measuring the actual outcomes, and then driving that content improvement cycle. So content measurably improves over time and you build value in the system. If any of you, like me, have been playing extensively with Claude and I've been trying to build a second brain, sort of LLM wiki into it. It has 18,000 pages in it now. It grows over time, but it's a huge effort. You have to sort of continuously harvest and mine and clean up and then pick up when it falls over and reconnect when it disconnects, all these different things. But when it works, when you get that loop working very well, it's an extraordinary experience. My own setup is Hermes agentic runtime using Claude with GBrain. If you look it up, Gary Tan, GBrain as a second brain LLM wiki kind of concept. And you put that all together, Telegram on top. I have different agents acting as development team, social media strategist, personal assistant, all these things. Like it's the context over time when it gets to know you. It's a transformative experience. The same thing is true in these harnesses. So we have 4 product imperatives, we call them, at Phrase. And this slide I actually created in 2 minutes before coming on stage. So I'm reading it for the first time along with you, but this is drawn directly from our internal sources. And there's a longer blog that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. You can find it at phrase.com. If you go to the resources section on the website, and you can find my blog. It's quite long, but it talks about a big transformation we've been driving at the company internally about how we use AI, which is like very, very heavy. We have every intention of being the most AI-pilled business in Europe. Not the most AI-pilled localization business, even language business, right? But in any industry. And the blog talks about these 4 product imperatives. So they're really 2 reinforcing loops. So headless and guided are the first 2 loops. Headless, I think people know generally what that means. It's exposing capabilities through APIs, MCP, command line interface, and so on. What it actually interestingly doesn't say on here, and should, is that I also see headless as a distribution model for the value that localization teams can provide. So today, I can't see you as an audience, but I'm going to imagine I can see you and ask the question, put your hands up if you've ever been in that position where you find yourself like running after the business saying, don't do shadow localization, don't use that other tool. We've got a great process. We've got a great team. We've got some software. We've got some assets. Please work with us. We can help you, pull us in upstream, right? I mean, I'm sure that resonates with people in the audience. And so the unfortunate thing is it sort of relegates us a little bit to a bit of a compliance function, right? And like, please comply with this company standard. The problem is business people, broadly speaking, don't like compliance, right? Business people, broadly speaking, are pragmatists, impatient, don't love to be told no or slow down, and they will take the shortest path. It's like water. It'll take sort of the shortest path to getting something done. And if that is going online or pressing the little translate button in their new bit of software that they're using, then that's what they'll do. So headless, I think, is a really interesting distribution concept for the value that a localization team can provide, because now you can build all that central infrastructure and quality control and all the terminology and like memory style guides, all of that stuff. But you can then enable the business to be a consumer of that without them even knowing they are a consumer of that. So they no longer have to follow a process and fill in a form. They can just use whatever application they're using in the way they normally use it, and then it will flow headlessly through the language infrastructure and back to them. So now suddenly you as a localization team aren't playing compliance anymore. You're just adding value and you're doing it to everybody, and you can spend a lot less time chasing around. So I think this as a distribution model is really interesting. The guided experience, we talk here about on the one hand, it being like a text-based chat interface across the top of the platform. Fine. Okay, interesting, but like not game-changing. More interesting, we start to bring in visual artifacts from our design library and bring workflows and tables and graphs and analytics into that same experience. So that's more interesting. Most interesting here is the opportunity for the intelligence behind this to be proactive. So, you know, dear user, you asked me to do X. I can do X, but I can also do X more cheaply, or I can do X like better and for a bit more cost. Other people in your company have added this. Actually, the feedback from consumers is that if you optimize in a slightly different way, you'll get a better outcome. Like that sort of proactive intelligence coming back to the user through this interface is something that really excites me a lot. And these two are interesting, right? If you imagine a product like ours, like a planet with a sort of hot core of capability, and then the UX as the sort of bit humanity experiences on the outside. What we're really doing here is reaching down inside and pulling the whole thing inside out, like all that headless exposure, and then exposing all of that through natural interface. Yeah, that's a lot more exciting. And then the cool thing about these two as you build them is that you discover all the APIs you wish you had and you haven't done yet, so you go build those. And where the documentation in your existing APIs isn't as good as you want it to be, so you fix that. And then you use a bunch of agents to do all of this faster and faster and faster. The final thing on these two, I promise the other two are a bit shorter. Final thing on these two, which is really interesting, is this concept of encoding the knowledge. Satya Nadella talks about this, the CEO of Microsoft, how it's so important that companies, all companies, encode the knowledge that they have in the heads of their people, in the experience of all the people, into the software and the models that they run. So we have this amazing group of people who have decades and decades of experience of deploying these technologies at a massive range of companies around the world in lots of industries, and they've touched every edge case you can imagine. And the software with its drop-down menus and its tick boxes today, you know, cannot possibly address all of these edge cases, right? So what we do is we're now, and we've been doing this for a couple of months, we've been writing this sort of internal world model, right? If you take the Jack Dorsey concept, this world model of all the edge cases, all the implementations that our forward deployed engineering team have done, and encoding all of those. So then when customers go into something guided like Atlas and they say, hey, I want to do X, it isn't just a case of mechanically like operate the drop-down menus behind the scenes without the user having to do it for themselves, which is nice, but it's actually about taking all of that knowledge and then applying it so that it's almost as if you've got a forward deployed engineer online, like digitally. Like the software comes with its own forward deployed engineering. So that's kind of cool. Okay, the other two, I promise more briefly, compounding intelligence. This is this concept that you can apply different transformations to content. And what's interesting is it's not just all the different transformations you can apply, but the metadata that you generate by understanding the weighting. So I overweighted this transformation, I underweighted that transformation, I layered this, or I took a layer out. What was the impact of that on my intention? Did I achieve it or not? And then you build a second order model around that intelligence. And that, of course, compounds over time for that particular customer. And that becomes something that you know, like creates a tremendous amount of value over time. And the intent proximity is this sort of getting closer to the objectives, right? Understanding on the way in, this content is intended to inspire, educate, warn, engage, whatever it is. Now, metrics are going to be daily active usage, basket rate completion, whatever it is. And then on the way out, capturing that and then putting it back in. So this getting closer to the business intention is important. I also think as a practical matter for localization professionals, if you go to the business and you say, I can help you if I understand your intention, right? It's a different conversation. It's a way of like shifting left as well to say, I need to understand the intention because you tell me the intention. I'll tell you what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to custom prompt my system. So I need to know your intention. Like otherwise you get the generic, right? So help me out here, right? I'm going to help you. So intent proximity, I think, is important. So we've got these layers that compound value, and it's an accumulating system. And this is why we started to call ourselves a language intelligence platform rather than a language technology platform, which I think was already a step in the right direction. The industry does need to evolve its vocabulary from, decades old terminologies to describe ourselves, and which also still keep us in a box, right? Like, and keep us in the corner. So we've got to evolve how we describe ourselves. And I think language technology platforms was good. We want to take that to the next level. Again, I think when you talk to business people about language technology, it still evokes too much like solved problem. And it also, they hit technology and they think, can we build that, right? And we know they can't. We know it's difficult. Like, we can have that whole discussion debate in the Q&A or however, but when we talk about intelligence, what we mean is, yes, use of AI, but also it's actionable, right? It's like you can do intelligent things. The system's intelligent, what you do with it is intelligent, and it's about like compounding and building that over time. And actually, there's an important point here in the middle around the ecosystem of third-party tools. There's something I believe in very, very passionately, and as proud as I am of everything that we've built at Phrase and the strength and depth and breadth of our capabilities, I believe very, very strongly that like we should have the humility to understand we operate in a heterogeneous ecosystem where a customer of ours is going to use multiple technologies, oftentimes multiple service providers, and there's good reasons for doing that. And they want to be able to stitch all of those things together. So we need to be a platform, hence language intelligence platform, that customers can build on top of with our rich headless motion, partners can build on top of with integrated solutions. And now those of you that are our customers, as soon as you log in, you literally get like partner solutions on the homepage, and you click a button, you get hundreds of them, and it's integrated, it's visible. We're like actively promoting solutions from partners that even compete with things that we do. Because again, there are certain things that we do that will meet many people's needs, and then a partner will come in with a specialist or an improved capability that might be custom technology, custom services, or both. And we want to enable that so the customer is more successful. So I think this is very important because, again, it then enriches the compounding intelligence of the whole system. And this last point, I was posting on LinkedIn the other day, and I realized that I've pinned a video I did in 2023, and it's still up there. And I'm sort of leaving it there deliberately because I made a prediction then, which, we'll see if it turns out to be right or wrong. But one of the things I've been talking about for a while, and I'm yet to see, let's be honest, I haven't seen this really yet, but I still believe it's a sort of directionally correct prediction, is this concept of layering in real-time data. So political events, weather events, seasonality. I think people feel differently when their local team won the championship to when they came close and lost in the final. I think people feel differently the day after an election when their candidate won or lost. I think they feel differently when it's baking hot outside as it is here, or not. And you can start to see how these types of real-time adaptations could be layered on top of all the demographic stuff we know about our customers. Again, age, race, gender, religious affiliation, cultural nuance, previous purchase history, stated interests, right? If I go to Nike.com, maybe I'm following an athlete, maybe I'm following a sport, maybe I'm interested in the technical specs of a piece of clothing or apparel. So you can know all of that and then layer on top of it this real-time stuff. I think that's part of our future as well. So look, last section, and the role upgrade that's been called here. So I think I've sort of hinted at a bunch of this stuff, but I think it's about imagining ourselves differently. It's about describing ourselves differently. And I say ourselves for the industry, including ourselves at Phrase, right? We're not the world's best localization platform, right? We talk about being a leading language intelligence platform. So language, not localization. Language is the programming language of AI. Language is the programming language of people. Language is the emotional connection that we can create with business users and consumers. And if we as a team like really upgrade ourselves, then we avoid being seen as that cost center with the horrible risk of elimination. And I think what localization teams can position themselves as is like orchestrators of this harness, custodians of the AI. How do you apply AI safely? How do you manage drift? Who's going to look after it when the underlying models change and all the weightings need to be recalculated? Who's going to be responsible for the outcomes? And how intelligently are we as a company taking advantage of all of these new capabilities? Are we just saying now that it's engineering? Are we going to give engineering the legal function and finance and sales and tell them just to code it? Or are we going to respect the intersection of technical ability and functional competence, and then in that intersection position ourselves as a language industry, as orchestrators of these harnesses? And then are we also going to build, we at Phrase, it's interesting that the AI has actually pulled out this sentence, automate meaningful parts of their work and share it with the team. So a couple of months ago, I said to our whole company that we were going to define 5 levels of AI fluency, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that everyone in the company had to be at least a level 2 within 90 days. And this is, as it happens, this is the definition of level 2 that we're using. Automate a meaningful part of your work and share it with someone. That's the definition that we're using internally. So it's pulled that into the slide, which is kind of interesting. We call that builder level. And I think, again, this is, not everyone in localization needs to be an engineer. They can partner with engineers. Not everyone in engineering is going to be a localization specialist, but roles everywhere are merging, and we can build empathy and understanding for one another. And we should be building. I mean, there is a whole build versus buy debate. I've said this on stage before, I am the highest spender on tokens at our company. I say that with mixed feelings because I'm also 50% as efficient as our engineers. In other words, I spend twice as many tokens to achieve a pull request as our engineers do, because I'm not an engineer, right? So there's a level of competence and skill I've reached, and there's a level of competence and skill I have yet to reach. But the point is, I believe in building. And so I don't see it as actually a versus or an either or. I think it's a both and you just got to pick the right things and choose what you build on top of. And then finally, if we get this intent proximity right, then we shift left, we talk in business language, and we move from being a reactive cost center to being a crucial dependency for the rest of the business. I'll share an example with one of our customers. This customer actually presented at Lockworld, and now they have 1/3 of global revenue from international markets that they weren't in before. And this is what helped them get there, right? We have an LSP, one of our capabilities that we built. That was the quote they gave. And then we have a company that's massively reduced their customer support. And the thing about these is, it's not, I mean, like every vendor is going to come and tell some success stories. So I'm not majoring on this. We have lots of it. But the point is, it's measured in business outcomes. That's really the key takeaway here. So 2 last slides. Quote here from a very, very large technology business that you have all used, builds hardware, maybe on some of your desks right now. Orchestration is the demand. The models are there, MT's there. It just takes a lot of effort to orchestrate what you're going to use and when, and that's how you generate real value. 3 takeaways. Commodity trap is real. Reposition now. Focus less on driving down, well, let me put a slight nuance on it. Driving down cost per word is important, right? It's just not the whole ballgame. It's important because if you know, or if you don't, then look up. And if you want me to explain in the Q&A, I can do that. A thing called Jevons paradox. It's the basic principle is the cheaper you make unit economics, the more units people use. And so actually total addressable market grows. So cost per word going down is a good thing. Cost of AI should be going down, except we've got a few IPOs coming up for some of the frontier models. So I don't know if the cost per word is actually going to go down. But the point is, it's not the whole ball game. The ball game is something else entirely, and that's just an enablement. So acknowledge that cost is going down. Focus on the quality, the value that can be created outside of that. The model's not the harnesses, and we need to upgrade ourselves and how we talk, move beyond translation and localization and quality. Thank you. I put my email address. I put a link to the blog, my LinkedIn, X. I try to be very approachable and available. So I would love feedback on what you've heard today. I'd love critique. And if people have any questions, then hopefully we have a bit of time to answer them as well. I don't see any at the moment, but please pop them in if you'd like to.
We are chomping at the bit with questions.
Thank you, Georg. And I love that you said that you perform better when interacting with people, because that's exactly what we are going to do today over the next few days. And we can go to the Q&A now. Jan has been monitoring the live stream session and also our Slack community. Jan, what questions do we have for Georg?
I can jump in if you want, and we can turn to Jan in just a second. Georg, thank you so much for inspiring us for half an hour, 45 minutes, and making us think out of the box. I had a million questions, but the first one that came to mind for me right away was that we've been talking about breaking out of our translation box for a while now, and you really are breaking it wide open with this vision of phrase. And so I have a very practical question for you that came to mind right away, because we've been very used to selling localization. And even in your speech, there was several times where you alluded to the fact that we're in the localization business, so to speak. But the vision that you're presenting is way beyond localization. I would think that it's more into the realms of multilingual content creation, and then you're talking about intelligence mixed into it as well. How do we sell that? And, how does the perspective change? Because it's easy enough to say, this is what we're going to be presenting and offering up to the world. But that's not, I think, traditionally the audience that we've been selling our services to. So I would think that comes with certain complications, and it puts us in competition with some untraditional competitors, I would think. What's your vision on that?
Yeah. So firstly, I guess it's worth acknowledging how hard it is to break habits, right? So you hear me say localization, and sometimes it's an accident, and sometimes it's to be specific about, the sort of roles and audience and departments that I'm talking about. So we still very much focus on enabling localization teams, localization managers, developers that support localization as that terminology is used today. I guess what I'm calling for is that I think our industry has some very strong headwinds, and we see localization teams being reduced in size, even eliminated in some cases. And I think it's because the business in those cases has erroneously believed that this is a solved problem. And so I think the path out of this is to sell back to the business a different vision that says, actually, language is important, and language is the programming language of people. So if you want an emotional connection with consumers or business users of your applications and services, you cannot simply do this with raw machine translation and without giving it any thought to getting the nuance absolutely right. I think it does potentially get us, and when I say us, I mean us a phrase, but also I mean us in the industry, again, outside of the box. So I talked about Headless being a distribution model. That for me is really exciting to see how that plays out, because now a localization team can go to any function at all and say, I don't need you to fill in my form. I don't need you to follow my process. Here's an MCP. Just hook this up to Jasper, Claude, Harvey, whatever system you're using, and we're good. And maybe they don't even need to talk to them. They just get IT to do it, and it happens in the background. So that, I think, is pretty interesting to explore as well.
My phone's been blowing up. I know that Kostya has a question at the ready as well, and then we'll switch to Jan to get the live audience involved. But Kostya, do you want to pitch your question to Georg as well?
Constant asked one question I really liked. So DeepL went big due to product simplicity. something that could be scaled massively. Now, tools like agent builders, orchestrators, and IDEs require more technical to use. Can they grow as much? I think this question, George, is like very interesting. You know, how simplicity versus this whole new thing of AI comes along.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of angles to think about this from. The first one is DeepL and others who've put in huge amounts of effort into building essentially competitors to the foundation models. There is, in my view, a structural challenge for them, which is that the world is not unimodal. And so today, like my company and many others, is spending a ton of money with Anthropic, and it's just going up and up and up. Now, I do believe it'll come down a bit as, I mean, they yesterday, enabled the capability for you to define a default model across your company. Until yesterday, you couldn't set the default model for your Anthropic instance. If you're an Anthropic admin like I am, that is unbelievably irritating. So they would just keep moving the default model up, and you just have to beg people, please don't use Opus for everything, right? And now you can set a default. The point is, Anthropic's like incredible rise creates an imperative. It creates a space like Amazon's "Your margin is my opportunity" motto. It creates a space for open source models and on-premises models to come in and play an important role. Like, not everyone in my company necessarily needs to use Anthropic for everything. So there's now a real commercial imperative for us to very actively evaluate whether it's cheaper for us to put a box on someone's desk or a box in a server room or a box on AWS and run a local model instead. And then, like, there will be models for many different use cases. So these companies that are sort of essentially betting their whole company on, like, my model is the best. Well, you have to wake up every day and be the best every day. And like, I know from the data that is not the case. Because we aggregate models and we're a harness on top of all of these models, we can see the data based on usage from customers, and we can see that the world is not unipolar in terms of like model consumption. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. Simplicity is good. Like, if you take the Elon heuristic of redefine the requirements, then delete, then simplify, then automate, like, simplicity is really, really good. But if you are like a Phillips head screwdriver and someone has a flat head screw, well, it doesn't work. So you need to have a bunch of tools in the toolbox. That's the first thing I'd say. The second one is, like, context and harness engineering is not simple. What can be simple is how users interact with these things. So you can have a team that reach deep into the guts of these systems and set it up to do amazing, unbelievable things, and then users that have no idea of what's going on in the background and never should and never would and aren't interested. And that is a very sensible way for things to work. So you should have, for some reason I hear Robin Williams' voice of the genie in Aladdin, like, unbelievable power, but then users just have like an easy interface, right? That's how I would think.
Georg, we have a question in the chat that I wanted to lob your way because I'm quite interested in that one as well. I think most of us are kind of intrigued by what you said about building your own wiki and your second brain, so to speak. We've been involved in that a little bit ourselves as well. And there's a question from Mihai in the chat that says, was Obsidian considered by Georg as part of his wiki LLM? Or why did you choose your current setup? Can you recommend it? Is there something you would have done differently if you had to start all over again? And maybe give us some tips for people that are at the start of this exercise.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I actually started out using Obsidian and switched. A couple of my colleagues use Obsidian and love it. So I'm not sure that it's, I think it's personal choice. And what I did, of course, was I went into Claude and I asked it, can you compare these two and what are the use cases they're good at and so on. I found GBrain, and the G doesn't stand for Georg, it stands for Gary, who's the person that wrote it. So Gary Tan, Gary with 2 R's and then T-A-N, he's the president of Y Combinator. And I first found him because he actually wrote something else called G-Stack. So if you're like me, I never wrote a line of code in my life before February. And now I'm coding like constantly. In fact, I'm So like I have things running right now. I can share my screen and show you open and Claude Code running. GStack helped me enormously because it's like having a whole team of experts in your pocket. So there's a /plan CEO review, and then it just asks you a bunch of questions to help you structure your thinking. Plan -eng review, and it like asks you a bunch of technical questions. I understand 10% of what it's asking me, but you sort of do a little bit of that kind of makes sense, and it always makes a recommendation, and you go through and answer the questions, and then it will ship it, it will do a QA, it will deploy it, you know, so all these / commands. So that's actually how I got started on coding, because I found it very intimidating as a non-technical background. And these / commands really just helped me. So I found GStack first and then GBrain. I thought, well, that kind of makes sense because it's from the same guy. And the other thing about GBrain that I liked was that it was positioning itself very much as a memory layer for agents, which was where I was really trying to get to. Now, I'll extend the question slightly. What I feel like I've had enormous value. So now when I talk to Claude or my Hermes agents that are connected to this GBrain as well, they have a massive context on my business, like this is being recorded. There are themes in here. Every theme gets a markdown page. The people get marked down. It's all linked. So it has an amazing context. What I think is really interesting is where this goes, because individuals now have some really good tools for memory. But then how do you link those together? So if I've got a brain and my colleague has a brain and so on, how do you link those together to get the power of multiple brains? How do you respect privacy where appropriate? And then how do you stack that across the company? So then you've got like individual, team, department, company, brains. And this no one has cracked yet. No one has actually written the system yet for role-based access control, auditability, rollback, injection hardening, all those things that you would want as you think about the layers of memory across a company. There's some businesses that I'm following. There's one called Super Memory that looks kind of interesting, but I haven't seen anyone crack this at a company of more than like 10 people so far. Everyone that's saying they're doing it at like company level is basically using one big GBrain, and it's a company of 10 to 30 people. I haven't seen anyone structure it yet. But I have talked to some AI researchers who are looking at this. So I think there's a lot of work happening, and I'm sure there'll be breakthroughs soon.
Might it be an idea for Phrase to get involved? And it's a new business model for Phrase. Maybe you guys can do it in a multilingual way here.
Maybe.
Very good.
Question I see, someone said, no need for human post-edit, which I just want to tackle. I don't believe in zero human for anything, including post-editing. Again, if you look at that video I put up in 2023, it talks about a content explosion, which we haven't seen yet, but I still believe we will see, again, linked to Jevons paradox. And it's just that, like the machines, whether it's MT or LLM or whatever comes next, the machines are getting better and better all the time. And as they get better, businesses will get more confident to do more things and more use cases, and so volumes will grow. But as they get better and better, they're not going to be perfect. And the humans still need to be the orchestrators. They need to run the harness. So I'd say two things. One is just that narrow, like post-editing piece will be a diminishing percentage. It just will be. But a small percentage of a very large number may still be a large number. So like the total amount of human post-editing that happens in the world may even grow, but it won't grow nearly as much as the amount of volume of like total content, because the machines get better and better. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I actually think that people that are good at post-editing are also potentially, if they are minded to kind of take on new skills, is to be very good at like helping do evaluation, helping run the harness itself. So some of those people can be very good at that other work upstream, and humans need to be involved at both ends.
Awesome. Jan, is there anything else from the live stream that you want to ask Georg?
Right now, not. But again, maybe this is the call for everybody. Please use the live stream and our chat on YouTube to comment what you like, what you don't like, what you believe is true or maybe not. Give us our take, please.
And has been very gracious with his time and availability. I'm sure if somebody has a specific question for you, about your keynote, you'll be available for that. Georg, I sent you a connection request 2 years ago, I think, and you're one of the only people I'm not connected to in localization, so I'm pinning you against the wall this morning. After this, we're going to be connected, I'm
people
sure.
on spot, right?
I'm after this, we're going to be connected, and I might even send you a couple of questions later on for my platform. Thank you so very much for inspiring us.